Good evening, y'all. This is Brandon with Archie Cinema doing my next movie review here. Today we're reviewing the Criterion 4K collection of the 1992 Spike Lee film Malcolm X. This is an absolute masterpiece. To me, this is Spike Lee's magnum opus. Denzel gives a phenomenal performance. I think the best performance of his career. Definitely should have won the Oscar for this, but I get it. Pacino didn't win for Godfather 1 or 2 or Justice for All, so they gave it to him for Son of a Woman. That's fine. That's a whole nother story. Also, will say this, I will be giving away some spoilers, so if you're wary of spoilers, definitely watch this movie and come back. But basically, this film is the life and legacy of Malcolm X from childhood, his childhood trauma, what triggered that to adulthood, which led to his incarceration, to his rebirth by joining the Nation of Islam, to his growth in regards to that religion, to martyr when he was assassinated in 1965 in the Audubon Ballroom. So this movie just details all that. Masterpiece film. I actually bought the old Blu-ray of this in 2011, but the new Criterion 4K, and there are some similar, all the same special features, some of the same special features ported over. I'll go through each of those one by one. But this 4K upgrade is definitely worth the upgrade. It's a new 4K digital restoration supervised by cinematographer Ernest Dickerson. Also, it's a new 5.1 surround sound audio. So if you have the old Blu-ray, definitely this is an upgrade. But masterpiece film, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies ever, detailing the life of Malcolm X. All right, I'm going to be going to the special features next. This first special feature is actually ported over, like I said, from the 2011 Blu-ray. It's a audio commentary featuring Spike Lee, Ernest Dickerson, cinematographer, Barry Alexander Brown, who's the editor, as well as Ruthie Carter, who's the costume designer. Spike, his input is basically how much everything was riding on this movie. This was definitely a passion project. And he said every time I went on the street, he always heard people saying, "Hey man, don't mess up Spike, don't mess up Malcolm X, Spike. You better not mess it up." So he was under a lot of pressure from the community because Malcolm X is such a civil rights icon. Hey man, don't mess up the portrayal of this man. So there's a lot of pressure on that. The details, the hardships of him getting things together. He also talked about Denzel Washington's transformation, how he took a year off, told his agent to not book any other films. He was going to completely focus on this film. He wanted to try to spiritually connect with Malcolm, not just to be a portrayal, but a spiritual connection to where I think he said Denzel stopped drinking alcohol. He stopped eating pork. He started reading the Quran to try to spiritually connect with Malcolm. And he talked about later in the movie where those, in this movie, they have speeches that Malcolm X actually made, but there was a part in the movie where Denzel playing Malcolm X is speaking in Harlem, and there was a script that they had, but Denzel kind of went off script and started speaking on his own. And when Spike yelled cut, they asked him, "Hey, like Denzel, where did that come from? That wasn't in the script." He's like, "Spike, I don't know. That wasn't me talking." So he wanted to, it's deep. He wanted to try to spiritually connect with Malcolm. So that's basically Spike's input into the commentary. Another interesting part I realized that Spike went into, I didn't realize till you go back and watch the movie, how this movie could have gone from a PG-13 rating, what it is, to a rated R. In the scene where Malcolm X is actually sniffing cocaine with his girlfriend, you see him, lifting the cocaine spoon up to his nose. The shot goes away, and then it comes back to see the after effects. And Spike was like, that would have made the movie a rated R if we saw Denzel actually sniffing, So I was like, that's interesting. That just that little detail would have made it a rated R movie. So much input into that, and the people that helped Spike, he really goes into that. So his input into the commentary is amazing. Also, Ernest Dickerson. If you're a cinematographer and are into lighting, I mean, this Ernest really is a master of his craft, going to how every scene, almost like the lighting was almost like a character on his own in the movie, how certain scenes at night, certain scenes, whether it be when Malcolm was in his criminal life or just going through the odd jobs or the prison scenes, every light represented something. And they also talk about how they were inspired by The Godfather, how The Godfather, the first Godfather was actually on a very minimum budget, but the lighting that they had and the camera angles almost made it seem like it was more expensive than it was. So they took a lot of input as far as the cinematography from The Godfather. So it's a lot of good information in regards to what Ernest Dickerson is talking about, the lighting that they used to track the scenes and bring that out. Next is Barry Alexander Brown, and he talks about basically how they were trying to. The movie's 201 minutes long, but it goes so fast you won't recognize it. About how they tried to compress Malcolm X's life into 3 hours and 35 minutes, which is hard to do, but they did their best. But they tried to maintain the integrity of Malcolm X and squeeze everything into this movie the best they could. Also, they talked about Ernest and Barry talked about how it was to film in the Middle East and some of the hardships they had. They initially had to get permission to film the different religious scenes and things of that nature. But they said once people saw that what they were doing, they opened up to them. But the things that they had to go through to get filming done and things of that nature also. And they talked about also how this movie kind of represents all of Spike's loves. This movie is a comedy, it's a drama, it's a musical. You see the dancing scenes in there, like all mixed up into one. So you see some of the maybe musical elements that Spike Lee made in movies like School Days and things like that. He brought those elements here and the other elements of his filmmaking into this movie. And next, Ruth Carter talks about the costumes design she had and the process for that, how she saw pictures of Malcolm X and was, the zoot suits back in those days, but they were in black and white. So she had to try to picture or ask people what the colors were, try to get us color schemes for that. How she went into a lot of research as far as getting the letters from Malcolm X in prison that he wrote and, like different write-ups and things that he had in prison. So there's so much that went into the research of this movie that they go into detail. This is amazing commentary, definitely one for the ages. The next special feature is called Spike Lee in Conversation. This is a conversation between Spike and Barry Michael Cooper, director, writer. And they talk about the origins of Barry Michael Cooper and Spike working together. Spike talks about the origins of black filmmakers in Hollywood and some of the people that inspired him. And once again, Spike talks about how this drum beat, how black people kept saying, "Hey, Spike, don't mess up Malcolm X." So that was, like I said, the pressure on that. That's kind of the drum beat. Once again, talking about how he had to fight for the length of the movie because they wanted to be shorter than it was. So he really had to fight for it to be as long as it was to tell the true story of Malcolm X. Also, he talked about how he wanted to get Louis Farrakhan's blessing, where he literally took a flight to Chicago, spoke with Louis Farrakhan. And Louis Farrakhan was more concerned with Elijah Muhammad's portrayal than the actual movie. But he said he did later on, after the movie came out and Louis Farrakhan saw it, he said he did appreciate the movie. So they also talk about how Denzel actually in a 1981 play on Broadway called Chickens Coming Home to Roost, he actually already portrayed Malcolm X. He already had some footing in that role, and he just took it to the next level and talked about how he prepared for the movie once again. So many different, like I said, this is definitely a passion project for Spike also. And they also go into how the whole scene of the set really changed when they had to shoot the assassination scene. It was really hard for everybody. People were crying on set, et cetera, but they knew they had to shoot it. He said it was a fun movie to make, but once that scene started to come and they knew they had to get ready to shoot it, like, there was a different tone in the movie. Even in the commentary, Ernest Dickerson said the actors who played the assassins were just mentally messed up, on the day of shooting that scene, but it just is what it is. Malcolm also talked about his detailed conversation with Miss Betty Shabazz, the late, great Miss Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's widow, and their relationship. So he wanted to get some insight in their relationship also. And Barry also said how there's a real connection to this movie in real life, how they actually live blocks away from where Malcolm X was assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. And his father actually told him when Malcolm X got assassinated, he actually ran down to Audubon Ballroom to see what's going on. I guess after it came out what happened, but the police all around, so they wouldn't really let him in. So it's a connection with that in this movie. Also, Barry Michael Cooper talked about how this movie, he thanked Spike Lee for this movie because they really appreciate and love this movie. It brought his family together. His son loves this movie and talked about how much of a genius Spike Lee was. So they really just, spoke about just the importance of this movie to the community as a whole, the Black community as a whole, and just film and just cinema as a whole. So that's this particular special feature. The next feature is an interview with Delroy Lindo, who portrayed West Indian Archie in this movie. Delroy talked about a lot of his background. His background is in theater, talked about, his experience with theater. Also talked about this was his first significant theatrical performance. He'd done a few television things and done Broadway, but this is his first theatrical film of a big significance. He talked about also how him and Spike Lee were on the same page from day one. They both knew what they wanted from each other, so they were able to feed off each other's energy. So as far as director to actor, that was never a problem. Talked also about reading the first time he read the autobiography of Malcolm X and how that changed his life, and it definitely helped him in the process of the movies. He's already kind of familiar with what was going on. Spike initially saw him on Broadway, and he actually had Delroy audition for Do the Right Thing, but he politely declined at the time, but hard feelings, and he was asked to do this. He remembers doing the initial reading. You had Denzel and the other actors in a room, and he remembers the actor Al Freeman, who portrayed Elijah Muhammad, and he remembers him first talking, and it was like he was shocked because he sounded just like the real Elijah Muhammad. And also with that, how as the film progressed, they realized they were really doing something special. Like the more and more days they started filming, like this is a whole nother energy that we're getting into. They also talked about how him and Denzel actually met in the American Conservatory Theater together. So they're already, to a degree, kind of acting together, acting in the same place. So they already were familiar with each other's talent. So that also made it easy for them to work with each other and things like that. He also talked about how basically for West Indian Archer, you had the biography, but he wanted to try to get some insight into the underworld and the world of running numbers. And he said he randomly met a man at the gym. He said, this is kind of older gentleman. He said, for some reason, something told him to go talk to him. He said, hey, man, do you know anything about running numbers? So, yeah, I know a lot about that. So they ended up, I think, going out to dinner or going to Delroy's house, I believe he said. And he started running down the basically the ins and outs of that world and, how it was done. So that gave him more insight and more knowledge on that world once he did the movie. But he said it's amazing how he just looked at the guy and said, I don't know, this guy I wonder if he knows about running numbers. And the guy ran it down for him. Also, how in the movie where it talked about he basically improvised West Indian Archie's illness, because they said, in the movie, well, he said in the autobiography in the script, it said West Indian Archie was near death, and he didn't know what that meant. It wasn't like he was this or he had this ailment or had this sickness. He's like, okay, well, I just decided to say he had a stroke, so that's why his character was like leaning over and falling over. So he made West Indian Archie have a stroke. So that was something he really made up, but it worked in the movie. And he also talked about how this movie, whether people think about what it's not, he's like, the camera doesn't lie. When you watch the movie, you can't tell me you're not seeing something special. So he wanted to just get that point across. And that point was proven to him watching this movie. After all these years later, like I said, it's a masterpiece, and nobody can deny the time and preparation that everybody put in this movie to make it what it was. The next feature is with composer Terrence Blanchard. He talked about, him actually meeting Spike and him actually having LA Lakers clothes on. And, Spike's a diehard Knicks fans, but that's how they kind of met. Is hey, you're loyal to your team, I'm loyal to mine, that's fine. They both were dedicated to their job. That's what he noticed from the beginning. Terrence goes into detail about the different, chords he would use. They show the sheet music that he was used working on different scenes. The first time they worked together was School Days, actually. The different orchestras that he would use. He really goes into detail about, how he wanted the scenes for the movie to kind of talk on their own or to that degree. He talked about how hard it was for when him and Spike actually worked on the movie Bamboozle, because that's such a, racially charged movie, dealing with, the actors and blackface. He said that movie actually brought him to tears, composing the music for that. So that was like, just something that blew his mind as far as that goes. He talked about how, he wanted to not just have Malcolm X's or Denzel's acting represent a scene. He wanted the music to represent a scene. So he used a 70-piece orchestra for the movie. He talks about the chords, the flow he wanted to get in the movie. So he goes into details about that. The next feature is a 2005 documentary called By Any Means Necessary, The Making of Malcolm X. Now, this was a feature that was ported over from the Blu-ray from 2011. So once again, now this is the actual, making of movie. This actually stars narrated by James Earl Jones. It features Spike, Ernest Dickerson, Martin Scorsese, Ozzie Davis, Norman Jewison. So many people in this movie. Once again, talk about how important it was, the hardship it was for Spike Lee to get this movie made, how he got celebrities to help him fund the movie, how this was, I think even Al Sharpton that was on here said this wasn't about money. It was truly about showing Malcolm in a certain legacy and telling his entire story, not just one part, and telling the whole truth and making the movie authentic. That was the ultimate goal in this movie, and they accomplished that. But it wasn't just about the money. It was more about the passion project and holding Malcolm up as a civil rights leader. So By Any Means Necessary, 2005 documentary. The next feature was also ported over from the Blu-ray called Malcolm X. This is a documentary from 1972 talking about the life and death of Malcolm X in biography form, and shows his speeches and what he meant to the civil rights movement. It's also some heartbreaking scenes of his funeral, how he was in traditional Arabic clothing, when they buried him and everything like that. So this is a documentary from 1972, basically cut and dry, just a documentary of the real Malcolm X's life, real speeches and real photos and video images of the real Malcolm X. 1972 documentary. Another feature, or once again ported over from the previous DVD, is deleted scenes and intros from Spike Lee talking about, basically why they telling about the importance of the scenes, but basically why they didn't make the cut. So he goes through all those, pretty cut and dry. And the final feature for this movie is a theatrical trailer that summarizes the movie also. So that's the end of it as far as the special features for this particular 4K DVD. All right, to end this Blu-ray review off, what I want to kind of do a little bit something different here, because the Malcolm X movie that is actually based off the autobiography of Malcolm X. This version is old. I remember I first read this when I was in, I think, middle school or high school. This was actually $6. So it shows how old it is. I need to update my copy. But if you really want the insight into the whole story told by him and also by Alex Haley, definitely this is a literary classic, and it's a good companion piece to the movie, because some parts of the movie are true, some are embellished, some things happen in a different time frame. Like there's a scene in the movie where before Malcolm is incarcerated, they had the conk haircut, they call it a process. They use chemicals to straighten their hair, and the pipes were frozen, and he goes to the toilet to wash. He literally went to the toilet to wash his hair out. That actually happened, but it didn't happen before he went to jail. So things like that. Because Malcolm X's movie is really so much detail into it, it really would have, if all things were to work and whatever happened, his movie really could have been a series that had several seasons. Like his childhood could be a season, his adolescence could have been a season, his 20s when he went into Life of Crime could have been a season. His time in the Nation of Islam could have been a season. So there's so many details to this. So definitely this is a companion piece. A lot of people don't read as much anymore, but definitely a great companion piece to get the details is the autobiography. Like, for example, how we talked about earlier, how in the special features, they said the character Baines is actually a fictional character. And Spike said actually it was a combination of different characters. Like Baines, there was a guy named Bimby in jail that told Malcolm how, because Malcolm was a tyrant in jail. He just didn't care about anything. It just went off. And the guy's real name was Bimby in jail. He actually told him how smart he was and was trying to get him on the right path. So that's the real guy, one of the real people that represented who Baines was. Also, who, it also had Baines as introducing him to the Nation of Islam and giving him knowledge of self. Actually, that was Malcolm's brother Filbert and his other brother Reginald. They're the ones who started hipping him to, the Nation of Islam and the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So they started really giving him insight and giving him knowledge of self. So he started picking up on this and reading and getting that information in the movie. Also, Louis Farrakhan, I believe, was one of the characters allegedly based on Baines. Allegedly, back then, his name was actually Louis X. Before it became Louis Farrakhan. So allegedly, he was also one of the characters that Bane was based off of. So it's so many things that goes into it. Like I said, he go even more in depth into his criminal life. I mean, it wasn't just the burglary. He was selling drugs. Was a pimp. So it goes into so much detail. His childhood is so much that goes into his childhood, the psychological effects that racism played on his whole family, to the way how his mother and father treated him. There's so many elements to this. So definitely, if you have time, as a great companion piece and to see the true story told by him, definitely pick up the autobiography of Malcolm X. Okay, so that's going to be it for this review. So thank you guys for hanging in there. I know this is a long one, but I tried to cover everything. So definitely give me some insight into what you feel about this film, or if you've read the autobiography, what you feel about it. You guys take care. Have a nice day. Good night.